did a video recently answering Google's most searched questions about Jehovah's Witnesses, so I figured I'd do the same for cults. How do cults work? How do they start? How do they recruit? How do they make money? Let's answer some of these questions. Let's get into it. Before we get into it, I just want to mention a couple of things. If you like the work I do and you want to see me continue to do it, you might consider supporting me through Patreon. If you want to get something back for your support, you can check out my retro game store where I sell controller and cartridge stands for everything from the original Nintendo to the Xbox One. You can also check out my Discord. I've been pretty active on there lately. Links to everything I've mentioned and a lot more can be found in the description. Okay, now let's talk about cults. Here's the first question. How do cults start? It depends on the cult. Some have been around for a very long time. Others are pretty new. Typically, it starts with somebody who's very charismatic, somebody who draws people's attention. They start out with an idea that seems revolutionary. People attach to the idea, and it colors everything the leadership has to say from then on. With Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard believed that he had some revolutionary ideas about psychology. He wrote a whole book about it called Dianetics. The basic premise is that humans have a reactive mind and an analytical mind. The reactive mind is responsible for stress, pain, and basically anything bad that happens to you. So you're supposed to face traumas you've experienced head on until you have your reactive mind under control. So you would talk out past traumas with another member of Scientology called an auditor until you had gone through every trauma in your life. The idea seems straightforward and believable at its face. It drew people in, but here's where it goes off the rails. They believe that the reactive mind isn't just responsible for stress and pain, but they also think it's the reason why you get physically sick. If you get your reactive mind under control, then you'll never get a cold. You'll never get a fever. You'll never get cancer. It goes beyond just mental or emotional pain and goes into physical illness. In the auditing sessions they hold, they use something called an e-meter to detect stress. It's a device that detects sweat on your hands. They're really easy to make. In fact, I made something just like it years ago with resistors, transistors, capacitors, and a computer speaker. It's pretty straightforward actually. Mine cost about $3 to make. They sell theirs for a few $1,000s. So anyways, you'll be talking in an auditing session and the e-meter will detect when your stress level goes up because your hands will start to sweat. Pretty much. If you don't have a traumatic experience linked to the subject you're talking about, then they'll tell you that you were reincarnated and your previous form experienced a trauma related to the subject. So you'll have to dig into your mind and come up with a story that explains the trauma you experienced in a previous life. The premise of his book, Dianetics, was complete BS and outright rejected by mainstream psychology. At any rate, the idea seemed revolutionary to him, and it seemed kind of revolutionary to others who were listening. The absurd stuff didn't come until later, and they'd feed it to you one small logical step at a time. They'd build this whole story over small logical steps, and all it takes is one small flaw in the logic to make the end result completely absurd. Jehovah's Witnesses did the same thing when they were starting out. Their big famous claim was that they had some special Bible math that they used to calculate when the world would come to an end. The math added up as long as you took a few things as fact. Like, for example, the idea that the Bible had a couple of hidden meanings in it when telling parables. And when the date they named rolled around and nothing happened, people were already invested. They already believed the rest of the story, so they stuck around despite the fact that the claims fell flat. The fact that they had a continued audience who continued to believe them meant they could build on that belief with even more absurd claims. The next question is, how do cults work? Obviously, cults are very complex. There's no straightforward answer here, but you can find some things that all cults have in common. One of the main qualities they all share is modifying their members' behavior. Think of it this way. Some of you may have heard of Pavlov and his dog. He was running an experiment in behavior modification on his dog. Every day, he would ring a bell and feed his dog. Ring a bell, feed the dog. Ring a bell, feed the dog. Until one day, he rang the bell, but didn't feed the dog. But the dog started salivating. It was expecting food. Two completely unconnected events, the sound of a bell ringing and eating food, are now connected in the mind of this dog. That's behavior modification, and cults do it all the time. They have a carrot and a stick. The goal is to outfit the person with a new personality that's more useful to the group. In fact, Jehovah's Witnesses even talk about this openly. The members are supposed to put on the new personality, quote unquote. And if you don't put on the new personality like they want, there will be repercussions. With Jehovah's Witnesses, the members will shun you for the rest of your life if you break one of their rules, or even just stop believing it anymore. friends, family, everybody. It keeps them from questioning what's happening. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who were born into cults, like I was, so my personality from the very start was formed by them. I have no idea who I would have been if I hadn't been born into it. Lots of people who join a cult later in life already have a personality formed out pretty firmly by the time they join. So when they exit, they know how to revert back to their authentic selves. Not to say it's an easy process. Whether you're born in or not, finding your authentic personality is very difficult. Next question. How do cults recruit? Again, this varies from cult to cult, but I'll give you some examples of how cults throughout history did it. With the Heaven's Gate cult, they'd put up flyers for workshops, getaways, or lectures. They'd use those lectures to explain their beliefs or ideas to the public in a non-confrontational way that seemed legitimate, honest, and straightforward. They wouldn't start giving you information on the more absurd ideas until after you started hanging around them more and you're more open to hearing and accepting their ideas. Jehovah's Witnesses will knock on doors, write and mail letters to random people, use social media, basically anything they can do to get the message out to people. But what they did in their early days was pretty clever. It caught people's attention. They used sound cars. This is back when phonographs were around. They'd have cars with a giant phonograph horn on the top, and they'd play a recorded message from the founder. Not only did it catch people's attention because it was so unique, but it also had the added benefit of delivering a message that's very specific and tailored to have the maximum effect on outsiders. It wasn't being improvised by active members. Next question. How do cults make money? A lot of them do it through donations, but honestly, donations only go so far, especially when you try to keep your cult members separate from the rest of the world and discourage college education, like Jehovah's Witnesses do. So what Jehovah's Witnesses have done is they got their members to build kingdom halls for them. Since the labor is free, all you need to do is pay for the supplies. The profit margin on selling it off is absurdly high. It might cost $30,000 to build a kingdom hall, but when you're done, it could sell for $200,000. So when Jehovah's Witnesses ran low on money fairly recently, they consolidated the kingdom halls and overbooked them, kind of like how an airline does it. They sell 120 plane tickets for a plane that only holds 100 people because they know only, say, 80% will show up. Then they sell off the old empty kingdom halls. Sometimes they'll outright have them build a new one for cheap and sell the old one. But that's just how Jehovah's Witnesses have been doing it recently. Other cults like Scientology and Mormonism heavily rely on the members to keep them afloat. Scientology goes for celebrities. Once they get a celebrity in the religion, they use their money and influence to spread the word. With Mormonism, you can't be a full member of the church unless you give 10% of your earnings to them. With Jonestown, Jim Jones was a communist, so Jonestown members would give every penny they had and every penny they earned to Jones. He would distribute it accordingly and keep the rest. It was a similar situation with Heaven's Gate, though that one was significantly smaller, only around 40 people. But the people they did have built websites for money. This is back in the 90s when it was an early technology, so it paid really well. So again, it varies from cult to cult. The next question is, how do cults differ from religion? There are two key differences between religions and cults, in my opinion. For one thing, cults modify people's behavior with rewards and punishments, which has the end result of creating a new personality, as I talked about earlier, and there has to be a hierarchy to enforce those rules. Leadership of some sort. So for example, I wouldn't call Flat Earth a cult because there isn't a clearly defined leadership that's enforcing rules and punishing people for breaking them. It's certainly a cult-like mindset, but not a full-blown cult. And it cuts both ways. A standard, run-of-the-mill, non-extremist church doesn't use behavior modification techniques to form out an entirely new personality that's more useful to the group. Now, don't get me wrong, many groups have behavior modification to some extent. Not all, but many. But how severe are the punishments for leaving the group? Some don't have any repercussions at all. You can switch churches or religions and nobody thinks anything of it. Jehovah's Witnesses are very unified. There's no switching churches or slowing down on studies or leaving with them. And certainly no questioning the leadership. They will pull the rug out from under you and you will lose everything. So that's the main difference between a religion and a cult. Next question. How do cults maintain control? They try to maintain control a number of ways. The first and primary way is by having the members disconnect from anybody who breaks the rules. They can't put them in prison legally. Basically, the most intense and effective means of punishing that they have is forcing friends and family to never speak to you again if you say anything critical of the group. Some groups like Scientology will outright break the law to ruin people's lives. They'll stalk you. They'll put hit pieces out on you. There are a ton of websites about people who are critical critical of Scientology, put up by Scientology itself. Here's an example. This one's a hit website on Leah Remini. The first paragraph says, "For 3 years, A&E profited from broadcasting Leah Remini's lies, distortions, and exhortations to hate. These resulted in bunnies, fluffy bunnies, and the even fluffier bunny of a Scientologist in Australia in January 2019. Prior to committing his heinous act, the bunny spouted off vicious anti-religious propaganda incited by A&E and the Leah Remini series." Of course, that whole thing is twisted around and in some cases completely fabricated. They will outright lie in the name of protecting the organization. Jehovah's Witnesses do the same thing. It's called theocratic warfare, but Scientologists take it to another level with their fair game doctrine. Remember earlier how I was explaining auditing sessions, where you basically go in there and tell every part of your life to a Scientologist? Well, that Scientologist takes notes on everything and sends them to the headquarters. They have a file on every single auditing session for every Scientologist who has ever existed. And the moment you become critical of the religion, a packet will show up on a newsroom desk with information about the most private details of your life. Or they'll show up on a website like this. Leah Remini isn't the only one who's had this done to her. There are a bunch of hate websites out there. Mike Rinder has one, Chris Shelton has one, and basically anybody who appeared in the documentary Going Clear or Scientology in the Aftermath. So anyways, that's the main way they control people, through intimidation. The secondary way, which is still very important, is through information control. They discourage people from reading certain newspapers or visiting certain websites. If you get caught on a website like jwfacts.com as a Jehovah's Witness, they will put you through an apostasy trial. You risk losing everything if you're caught. If you get caught listening to my videos or John Cedars or any other source of information that's even lightly critical of the group, they will take everything from you. That's how they maintain control. People don't want to risk looking at that stuff because they don't want to lose everything, which means they're never exposed to anything that's critical of the religion. So they never have a reason to go to those sources in the first place. That's how it works. Next question. Why do cults drink Kool-Aid? They don't. This is a common misconception. The whole Jonestown situation that went down is a source of that rumor. The story goes, he mixed some Kool-Aid with some cyanide and gave it to the cult members. But there's a slight error in that story. It wasn't Kool-Aid. It was Flavor Aid. Anyways, that's the source of the story. I don't know of any other cults who have consumed Kool-Aid in any notable way. Heaven's Gate used applesauce, not Flavor Aid. And certainly not Kool-Aid. Next question is, what do cults have in common? There are lots of similarities between every single cult. I'll just list a few. Number one is obviously behavior modification with a system of rewards and punishments. Control clothing and hairstyle. Exploit you financially. Require you to seek permission for major decisions, like marriages. Instill black and white, us versus them, good versus evil thinking. Change your identity, possibly even your name. Teach thought-stopping techniques to prevent critical thoughts. Deliberately withhold and distort information. Forbid you from speaking with ex-members and critics. Discourage access to non-cult sources of information. Encourage you to spy on and report on others' misconduct. Promote feelings of guilt, shame, and unworthiness. Threaten your friends and family. Shun you if you disobey or disbelieve. And teach that there's no happiness or peace outside the group. Those are just a few. A full list can be found at the link in the description under Byte Model. And finally, the last question. What do cults often rely on? Cults rely on people not seeking outside information, never hearing anything critical of the group. They rely on people silencing their doubts, which is why at a recent Mormon General Conference, they gave a whole talk about how you should doubt your doubts, not doubt the church. The moment people turn their critical thinking skills toward the cult, it's all over. So they heavily rely on information control. They also rely on emotional control through things like shunning, instilling fears or phobias about leaving the group, like if you aren't part of the group, when the rapture happens, then you'll be left behind. They rely on thought control. They'll use loaded language and cliches to stop complex thought. They'll use excessive prayer to block thoughts. Anytime you have doubts, just drop to your knees and pray to God. And finally, they rely on behavior control. Regulate your free time by loading you up with tasks for the church. Door knocking, church services, studying, praying, or whatever. Controlling your hairstyle or clothing. Controlling what you do with your free time, when you do have free time. Can't watch R-rated movies. Can't listen to certain music. Can't hang out with people outside the group. Can't even play chess, because the premise of the game is based on war. They take it to the absurd. That's what they rely on. But one of the most important things you can do as a cult member is listen to critical information. Read what the critics say about the group you're in. If they have the truth, if they're right, they have nothing to fear. Give it a look with honest, objective eyes. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. If you like what I do and you want to make sure I can continue to do it, you can support me in a few ways. First, you can support me on Patreon. That's probably the best way. But if you want to get something back for your support, you can check out my Teespring. I'm trying to make a shirt design for every cult I've covered. I haven't gotten every one, but I'm working on it. So check it out and see if your cult is up there. Second, you can support me by checking out my game shop. I sell controller, cartridge, and game box stands for every system from the original Nintendo and Sega Game Gear to the Xbox One and Nintendo Switch. So give that a look too. And finally, if you want to support me in some way other than monetarily, you can check out my other YouTube channels. I have a retro game channel where I answer questions like, why does Shy Guy have a mask? And why are CRT TVs the best way to play retro games? I also have the podcast where I talk about stuff I don't feel I can say on a monetized channel. And finally, I have my main channel where I talk about cults. I wish I didn't have to worry about dancing around subjects carefully in the first place, but I chose to do this as a full-time job, so unfortunately I rely on YouTube's AdSense and on the support of patrons to continue doing the work I do. Anyways, check me out in all those places if you haven't already. Thanks for listening, guys.